Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on December 18th, 2025. Today, we're very pleased to be joined again by our brother, Karim from BettBeat Media. Karim is a professor of political economy at a university in Hong Kong and also a social psychologist whose particular area of interest is the intersection between global political economy and human psychology. Thank you so much for joining us again today, Karim.
Glad to be back, brother. Glad to be back.
So today we are going to discuss an issue that has arisen in recent weeks, primarily as a result of a newly published video, or a video has surfaced that was shot earlier this year of the world-renowned Palestinian activist Ahed Tamimi talking about the distinctions or purported distinctions, as she might put it, between Judaism and Zionism, and also some commentary along similar lines that was published on X from somebody who may be Jewish, but we're not sure. So let's get into it. We'll start by reviewing a clip from the speech of Ahed Tamimi. For those of you who are not familiar with that name, Ahed Tamimi, when she was a girl living under occupation in the West Bank, she slapped an Israeli soldier. And by that act of extraordinary courage alone, became famous around the world. She ended up being thrown in prison by the occupation authorities some years later. I can't recall exactly how much time she spent under administrative detention, but it was a significant amount of time. I'm sure a terrible experience for her. And she has become increasingly outspoken, not fearful, I would say, but increasingly outspoken in recent years in regard to the occupier. And this clip I'm about to show you, the speech apparently happened earlier this year, some months ago, but for some reason, it was making the rounds on social media only over the last few days. So I think maybe it only came to the attention of the Zionist lobby for some reason very, very recently, and that's why it's circulating now. I had not seen it until a few days ago. So I'd like to show this clip to our audience, Karim. It's a couple of minutes long, but it's eminently worth listening to carefully. And then we'll get into it.
مش اللي بيمثلني اللي لحد اليوم وبعد ما خسرنا روحنا وخسرنا كل هالشهداء وأطفالنا وأهلنا بغزة عمالهم بيموتوا جوع لليوم بيشحد سلام باسم هاي القضية. سلام مع مين؟ مين حكى إنه إحنا بدنا سلام مع المحتل؟ أنا وصلت لمرحلة مستحيل أكون بسلام مع هذا المحتل لو إنه أثبت لي إنه إنسانياً أحسن مني. السرعة هذا بإيدهم وصلوني إله، وأنا مش راح أضل أبرر لهذا المحتل إنه أنا مش ضد اليهودية، ضد الصهيونية، أنا ضد اليهودية وضد كل حد. زي ما أنا بدافع عن إسلامي من داعش، دافع عن يهوديتكم من الصهيونية. وأنا لحد هاي اللحظة راح أضل أحكي إنه اليهودي إرهابي، وراح أضل أشوفه إنه إرهابي لحد ما ينتصر لدينه زي ما أنا بنتصر لديني. كيف أنا بدي أقعد مع طاولة نحل الانقسام مع أشخاص لحد اليوم بتروح مع الجلاد مع جلادها ومريضة نفسياً في دور الضحية. فللأسف الشديد إنه أنا مع تغيير السلطة. وهل هي أساساً إحنا بنسأل حالنا دائماً إنه
I'll just stop it there. The main point here, she obviously has some quite harsh commentary on the Palestinian Authority. Well-deserved, I would say, Karim. But the part I wanted to talk to you about this evening and explore with our audience is the part about Zionism and Judaism. And she said very clearly and forcefully, I no longer am going to go out of my way to distinguish between Zionism and Judaism. I was raised to view the Jews as my enemy. And unless they're going to fight for their religion as much as I fight for mine against ISIS, I'm not going to make that distinction. And she adds, of course, that she's not able or willing to live in peace with the Jewish inhabitants of Israel. And she says they are the ones who brought me to this point. Now, before I ask you to react, I want to also share with our audience an interesting thread on Twitter, which expressed similar sentiments. Judging by the name of this person may identify as Jewish. I don't know who the author is, But assuming this person does identify as Jewish, you're about to see similar sentiments coming from somebody of a Jewish persuasion. So here's what this person had to say. And you'll see E.M. Cohen is the GazaFunds.com is the handle of this individual. And on December 17th, he wrote, there are plenty of Jewish individuals in quotation marks who claim to oppose Israel, but Judaism, as represented by basically all of its international and local organizations and institutions, including its cultural and religious centers, is Zionist and directly supports the Zionist colonial project. I'm not abandoning Judaism to the Zionists. I'm not giving Jewishness up. He puts those in quotation marks and then says, what are we even talking about here? Judaism, Jewishness isn't something you as an individual own. It's a constantly evolving collective that has over the past century evolved to be racist, fascist. You as an individual celebrating Hanukkah or lighting Shabbos candles or making matzo or wearing a yarmulke doesn't negate the contemporary reality of what Judaism as a collective has evolved into. People really do not understand that the world is going to look dramatically different in the near future. We are not ready. Not so sure what he means by that last comment, Karim, but it doesn't sound good. So my purpose in neither of us identifies as Jewish, obviously, and just speaking for myself, I'm not going to purport to have any authority or the necessary knowledge or understanding to define what true Judaism is. Maybe I could do that in connection with Christianity because I devoted so much of my youth to the study of Christianity, and I grew up in a Christian household, or at least one that purported to be Christian. Been surrounded for my entire upbringing by people who identified as Christian, but I don't claim to know nearly enough about Judaism to define it. What I'm here and interested in, and if you, by the way, if you feel differently, Karim, if you want to offer a view about what true Judaism is, I certainly invite you to do that. I myself am not going to go down that path just because I don't feel qualified to do that. What I want to talk to you about is this whole idea that Judaism, as it is practiced by a majority of Jewish persons today, or those who identify as Jewish, is actually distinguishable from Zionism. And related to that, how are we, people who are not Jewish and who are appalled by what Israel is doing to Palestinians, how are we supposed to deal? What is the right thing to do in regards to this debate about Zionism versus Judaism? So with that as background, Karim, I'm just curious in your overall thoughts, any reaction you may have to these two expressions of, shall we say, dissent regarding the debate of Judaism versus Zionism.
Yeah, just like you, Dimitri, I'm not a specialist on Judaism, so I'm not going to do that as well. I wish I saved that video. I saw a video yesterday of a young man who said that he was very, very anti what's happening in Palestine, of course. He was very anti-Zionist, but he also said, and I call myself Jew. And he said, I will keep calling myself Jew, even though I will never call myself Jew with pride again in my life. That's what he said. But I keep calling myself Jew because I do not want to give my Jewishness, my Judaism, to those extremist freaks. And I think he made a very good point there. I am not going to judge anything Ahed Tamimi said. She is in a situation that is incomparable to me, you, or anyone I know. So I understand where she comes from. And I understand that for her, there's no distinction anymore. It reminds me of what Norman Finkelstein said, that his mother was done with Germans, not Nazis, but with Germans. Mm-hmm. So I get that happens once you are a victim of such a horrible genocidal state and people. But in my case, I am still going to be nuanced. I am not going to equate Judaism or Jews with Zionism. I know what you mean on social media. I have it on our Substack all the time. People are saying, just say it. It's the Jews. It's the Jews. It's the Jews. I'm not going to do that. As somebody of a mixed background, you and me, we already said we're going to talk a bit about our personal backgrounds. I just know how frustrating frustrating it is when people choose the easy way and just generalize a whole identity. Even if you just have one or two Jews that are not Zionist, I am not going to say that the problem is Judaism. And I know there are many Arab Jews that are not Zionist. There are many Orthodox Jews that are not Zionist. There are many Western Jews that are not Zionist, and they call themselves Jews. And then we say, okay, what makes you Jew if you're not religious, for example, because Judaism is a religion. But I had a very long comment from one of my Jewish viewers who made a very good case that you literally can be culturally Jewish and you can take on an identity of a cultural Jew. And I found that very convincing, and I accept that everybody can identify the way they do. So I think one of the worst things you can do is generalize and victimize people who are just not part of that perpetrator identity. There's nothing more frustrating than being part of an identity where maybe even the majority are racist and Zionist and you name it. But yet, if that's not you, I very strongly feel about not victimizing those people that do not deserve to be generalized among that group. That's my first thought about this.
So I absolutely agree that as long as there is at least one living, breathing person who identifies as Jewish and who condemns Zionism, rejects it outright, has no hesitation in condemning Israel's monstrous crimes, I'm never going to equate Judaism with Zionism, even though I don't purport to have the expertise or authority to define what "quote unquote" real Judaism is. And just let me pause there and say, Karim, although I have read the Old Testament, I haven't read and some parts of the Talmud, but that doesn't make me an expert. What I can say is, based upon my limited familiarity with the Jewish scriptures, is that like all religious texts, you can find lots of contradictions. You can certainly do that in the New Testament, and ambiguities, and there's a lot of symbolism, metaphorical language. And so reasonable people can have legitimate disagreements about what the real religion is, what the core values of the religion are, within limits. I think, for example, if you said that Christianity is a religion that sides with the oppressor, I would say that is outside the limits of a reasonable interpretation of Christianity. But within fairly expansive limits, you can have reasonable disagreements about what the religion is. So even people who are, much more familiar with the Jewish scriptures than we are, or certainly than I am, even they can have significant disagreements, and legitimately so, about what the real values or the core values of a religion are. So in any case, the main point I want to make initially is to completely agree with you about the need to recognize at all times, as long as it remains the case, that there are people who identify as Jewish and who oppose Zionism in Israel, to recognize that fact and to encourage people to take that into account when they weigh up the crimes of Israel. Now, having said all of that, I do have a beef. And for me to explain to you what my beef is and why, when I heard these comments from Ahed Tamimi and read these comments from this individual, Liam Cohen, if that's his name or her name, it resonated with me for a reason. And for me to explain to you the reason, I have to go back a few years. And it all starts when about a couple of years ago, I was in Lebanon doing some reporting for Reason to Resist. And somebody I had met one time in Canada, person you probably heard of, his name is Laith Marouf, who is a geopolitical commentator who now lives in Beirut and is the executive director of Free Palestine TV. He found out from my social media commentary that I was in Beirut. As I said, I'd only met him once before, and he contacted me and we had dinner in Beirut. We ended up going the next day. This was before the fall of Bashar al-Assad. We ended up going to Syria and spending a day in Damascus together. He impressed me with his extraordinary knowledge of Syria, and it was quite an educational experience for me to spend a day with him. He's Syrian, and he has a deep love of Syrian people and its history. He's also Palestinian. And I then began to ponder whether or not I should interview him. And I was torn initially. And the reason why I was torn is because that Laith is quite a controversial figure in Canada. I won't get into the long history of it, but it starts about 20 years ago when he was at a university in Montreal called Concordia, and he played an important role in stopping the war criminal Netanyahu from delivering a speech there. That thing actually descended into a riot. And then he made some comments in a private chat, which were leaked to the media, which a lot of people in the Zionist community claimed were anti-Semitic. And even some people who were anti-Zionist Jews said were anti-Semitic. So fast forward to last year, I ultimately decided I was going to interview Laith. And at that point, I was on the verge of embarking on a cross-country tour in Canada to discuss what I had seen on a trip across West Asia that I took last year. And this cross-country tour was being organized and sponsored by a coalition of anti-Zionist groups and peace groups in Canada. And when the two main persons involved in the organization of the tour, who are Jewish and who work with I'm not going to name the organization, but it's a well-known anti-Zionist Jewish group here in Canada. When they learned about the fact that I had interviewed Laith Marouf, they objected strenuously and told me that they expected me to stop interviewing Laith Marouf at least until I had completed the tour. And at that point, I said, please explain to me why you're taking this position. And they shared with me some of the things that he had said. I was already familiar with almost all the things that they said to me. I'll tell you, give you a flavor of what he said. He said that, Zionists are human feces, which is just a nice way of saying a piece of shit. And he also described Erwin Kotler, probably the most influential Zionist in Canada, former justice minister, as looking like a human penis with makeup. That's what he said. Okay, so this was colorful, perhaps, immature choice of words. But I said it wasn't public. It was not intended to be public. Somehow it was leaked, and then it became public. But the thing that I didn't know about and that they brought to my attention was that he had had an exchange by email with a leader of this anti-Zionist Jewish group in which he basically condemned them for not doing enough to confront Zionism within their own community. And, he made some rather unkind remarks about what was really motivating them and about their lack of courage and fortitude in wrestling back their religion from the Zionists who had stolen it from them. Now, at the time, I didn't view any of what he had said as anti-Semitic. However, I understood why people in the anti-Zionist Jewish community were upset about some of the things he had said. But I wasn't at all persuaded that that I had any basis to stop interviewing him, and I refused. I simply refused. And at that point, these two individuals who were the main organizers of my tour basically cut off all ties with me, and they canceled the tour. I'd actually spent a significant amount of money to buy airfare and so forth. They canceled the tour, and we have not had any interaction since then. That was, well over a year ago now. And I've continued to interview Laith. Laith has also been identified by the Israeli government in a report it issued last year, along with, other people who are well known for their defense of the Palestinian cause, as one of the 5 worst anti-Semites in Canada. So the Israeli government actually knows about Laith, hates Laith with a passion. He is really like a firebrand for the Zionist community in Canada. In any case, I nonetheless reflected a lot over this period of time about his criticism of the anti-Zionist Jewish community and whether they're doing enough. And sorry for the long-winded background, but I need to give you one more piece of this puzzle so you'll understand, and before I ask you to weigh in on this. Back in 2018, this happened before the event I'm about to explain, to describe to you, happened well before I started interviewing Laith and had all of these issues with, some members of the anti-Zionist Jewish community. But because of all of this controversy surrounding Laith, I went back and reflected on the experience that I had had. And the experience was this. In May of 2018, an Israeli sniper shot a Canadian-Palestinian doctor in Gaza. His name is Tarek Lubani, well-respected figure in Canada. He was out in the field in Gaza near the fence, separating the concentration camp from the homeland of many of the refugees in that concentration camp. This was during the Great March of Return. He was wearing medical garb. He was out in the field for the purpose of treating the wounded. And on the day that he was shot, one of his medics was shot right through the chest and killed instantly, even though he was wearing a vest, which identified him as a medic. And when the media learned of it in Canada, surprisingly, they gave it quite a bit of coverage. And at that point, Justin Trudeau was our prime minister at that time, puts out a statement condemning Israel. And it was the harshest statement he had ever made about Israel. But he didn't actually do anything to hold Israel accountable. It was just rhetorical. And despite his rhetorical, flourish, and the fact that he didn't do anything to back it up, the Zionists in Canada went absolutely crazy. How dare the prime minister, say these things about Israel? It actually wasn't nearly as harsh as it should have been, but it was relative to anything he'd ever said before. It was harsh, right? And they went crazy. So what does the Trudeau government do? It organizes an event in Toronto, which has the largest Jewish community in Canada, at a synagogue, a major synagogue, and flies into the country the Canadian ambassador to Israel, a character by the name of Deborah Lyons, and the Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, and the Canadian foreign minister, who was in Ottawa at the time, okay? And they organized this big event at a synagogue. And I'm going to show you a clip from what happened at this event, which was one of the most disgusting things that I, as a Canadian, has ever experienced. I mean, it's just appalling. Basically, the foreign minister didn't end up coming because there was a foreign policy crisis on that day, and she had to cancel. But the UN ambassador was there, and the Canadian ambassador to Israel were there, and they basically groveled in front of a huge audience of Zionists, leading Zionists. I recognize many of these people, and they were basically apologizing for the prime minister criticizing Israel's shooting of a Canadian-Palestinian doctor. It was extraordinary. And the way I found out about this event was that a member of this organization, again, out of professional courtesy, I'm not going to identify her, but a member of this anti-Zionist Jewish organization who knew me personally alerted me to the event and got tickets for us, and we went. So I was there with her, and she actually, as I recall, didn't want me. I was fairly well known to the Zionist community at that time. She didn't want to sit beside me because she was concerned that I would be recognized and there would be problems, right? So, and during the entire time that this thing was unfolding, I had the strong sense that she was worried that I was going to disrupt it. Okay, and I didn't. At the end of the day, I didn't disrupt it. I just sat there, I took videos, I took photos, I took notes, and afterwards I wrote a long article about it and published some videos about it, expressing my outrage. But there was no disruption of any kind by anybody during this disgraceful affair. So I'm just going to show you a quick clip of the Canadian ambassador to Israel at the time, Deborah Lyons, speaking to this crowd at the synagogue in Toronto. And just bear in mind that only days earlier, Israel had shot a Canadian citizen who was a doctor.
With all this potential, I talk about why is Israel so special right now? And I think there's something, as I myself approach that ripe old age, maybe there's something about 70. Maybe there's something about 70 years of a country, of people working so hard for 7 decades to create a country, all of the different aspects of that country. I sometimes refer to Israel as being in a renaissance right now. This magical period, where so much is happening. and Canada as well. After 150 years in this huge, vast space, we have a solidity, I think, on so many dimensions, culturally, our business community, our diversity, that brings Israel and Canada together at a very magical time.
So you heard it, folks. Israel's so special right now. It's in a renaissance. What a wonderful country. You know, we love Israel. And the thing that I just can't, it irks me. It irks me, and I have to say it. And that is, why wasn't that event disrupted? Why was I the only person there who apparently was even thinking about disrupting the event? Why didn't people from the anti-Zionist Jewish community come into that synagogue and disrupt that disgraceful, groveling episode and really call the leaders of their community to account, or at least the Zionist part of the Jewish community, which by all indications represents a majority of the Jewish diaspora, not just in Canada, but throughout the West? Why didn't they call them out? Why didn't they disrupt that event? Why didn't they condemn them for pressuring the Canadian government to retract its toothless criticism of, war crimes? And I don't have a good answer to that question. And I think, to the extent that there are members of the Jewish community who are listening to us today, and I hope they do, and they take this criticism as comradely input, are people, and this is my question to you, in your opinion, are anti-Zionist Jews doing enough to confront the institutionalized Zionism within their own community and bring this genocide to an end?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And when I see that video, Dimitri, I just cannot help but think Israel and Zionism have been literally the most, or one of the most successful cults we've ever seen, man. I mean, what you are seeing there, this is just Canada, but we have the same stuff in the Netherlands. You have it in Denmark, Belgium, the UK, France, Italy. They're everywhere. And these people are completely hypnotized almost by Israelism. I find it so baffling, but I generally think it is because there's so much capital behind it. There's so much capital behind Israel and those who are supporting Israel. We're talking about billionaires, corporations, etc. I think this is the key to their current power and success, is that there is just so much capital. They've really nested themselves into that most powerful capitalist elite that we see today. I think that is why all these politicians are just groveling, because of there's no other way. You won't get to the top without bowing down to the master, so to speak. Another thing I wanted to say is that you said that even though, for example, Trudeau, you were talking, it was Trudeau, right? Who was so critical.
Yes, he was the prime minister.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I've noticed something with Israel and Zionists that is a tactic that I've been seeing already for many years, and it always surprises me that people fall for it. You have the most Zionist people often saying something really, really mild, and you will get like massive outpouring of pro-Israel people saying like, he's an anti-Semite and he's an anti-Semite. And they often do that to the most pro-Zionist people. Why are they doing that? They are not only keeping the overtone window where it is, they're actually shifting it more to the right, more extreme. That is, never admit that somebody is doing well enough. Always keep them on their toes that they're afraid to be an anti-Semite. So they become more and more extreme supporters of Israel. That's a tactic I've noticed. And to your audience, watch it from now on. How many times they accuse people of anti-Semitism that are already staunchly pro-Israel. It's a tactic and it works. Okay, it keeps people on their toe.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that people are so currently, that there are so, or what seems to be quite little amount of Jewish people that seem to be fighting against Zionism. Okay, so we have very, very, very impressive people. Of course, think about Medea Benjamin, for example. But it seems like to be such a small group, and many people, after more than 2 years of genocide in the Jewish community, still seem to support Israel. It's baffling. I think one explanation would be some people, I think a lot of people of your audience would find it very interesting. We had an interview on our channel with Jay Shapiro. He was a documentary maker and a Jewish guy. And he actually talked about that, about his Jewish past, his breaking with his mother, with whom he had a good bond, because she was so, you could say, intertwined with Zionism. It's almost like, he said this was almost like as if his family was hypnotized, and he was the odd one out for not being pro-Zionism. And I think that is a story of many, many anti-Zionist Jews, that their families are just so cult-like indoctrinated psychologically that they just cannot disconnect from it. It's too difficult. It breaks down your whole existence. And I think that plays a very big role, and it makes people, maybe even unwittingly, very, very immoral, because you're supporting something so gruesome, so immoral. Why? Because your identity is connected to it. You see the same with a lot of Christians, a lot of evangelical Christians, for example. So I think that plays a very, very important role. But you know what I always have, Dimitri, as a non-Jew, as a non-religious person even, I always find it difficult to say that, because I remember being a young guy, I almost want to say young kid, young guy during when 9/11 happened. And I remember in those days, it was so common and popular almost for people to say, why don't I hear the Muslim community condemn? Why don't I hear the Muslim community condemn Islam or Islamic extremism? Why don't I hear the Arabs this, Muslims that? And it was so frustrating, because they were continuously saying mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. You know, the Muslim community was really coming out, at least in the Netherlands, on every TV show and saying, oh, we distance ourselves and this and that. And so it's, for me, it's very difficult to now start accusing Jews of the same thing. You know what I mean? But on the other hand, I do feel it just gives me the feeling that there is a very small, relatively small amount of people in the Jewish community, at least in the West, that actively resist Zionism and are becoming a powerful movement. You know, I'm not seeing it.
So I just want to put some meat on the bones of our discussion by referencing a poll that was done in the United States. This is an article from the Times of Israel on October 5th, 2025. And the poll done by the Washington Post found that nearly 40% of American Jews believe Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. And it also found that, I believe the figure, it doesn't actually say the exact figure there, here it just says most, but it was about 60% believe that Israel was committing war crimes in the Gaza Strip. But at the same time, so 60% say Israel is committing war crimes, 40% Israel is committing genocide, the crime of crimes. At the same time, the poll found that most American Jews are emotionally attached to Israel, believe Israel's existence is vital to the Jewish future, and support continued U.S. military aid to Israel. I mean, they aren't even willing to oppose military aid to Israel. So, you know, the numbers show clearly that a significant proportion, somewhere in the range of 20% of American Jews feel that Israel's committing war crimes, but still support the provision of U.S. military aid to Israel. I personally find these numbers, I just come out and say it, man. I find it shocking. I find these numbers shocking. But at the same time, it is really hard for me to understand the psychology of this, because I don't come from this culture, and I don't have the my people don't have, my people, the Greek people, have experienced oppression, but what happened to the Jewish people during the Holocaust was on a level of horror that few of any. Certainly, it's not something to which my own people have been subjected, and and certainly it wasn't the only period in Jewish history where the Jewish people were subjected to horrible persecution. So, it's hard for me to understand this phenomenon, but it does really shock me, and I don't know what to make of it.
Well, if I can jump in for just a
Sure,
short
please,
bit,
by all
Dimitri.
means. By all means.
I can say my people have, or at least half my people. I'm half Dutch, but my father is Algerian. And Algerians suffered millions of deaths under the French, and they had gas caves where they were just gassing Algerians like the Nazis. And I hardly see. I've never met Algerians who are anti-white or anti-European or anti-French, or become so incredibly indoctrinated with hatred for another group, not even the ones who were the perpetrators. In fact, the ones who were the perpetrators are biggest buddies with them. And of course, that brings us back to the history of Zionism that was already cooperating with Nazism, just like Zionism is now cooperating with the far right. It's nothing new. We act like it's something weird or new. It's nothing new. But what I'm trying to say is, it is not normal, in my opinion, the way it has developed. This identity, like I said, it's a cult-like identity. And like I said, people should see that interview with Jay Shapiro. It's really good, about that Jewish cult-like identity and how he was indoctrinated, or at least his family. And it was almost like a movie. He said, like you almost feel like an alien, the odd one out, and as if other people are just walking with their hands forward, like eyes closed, like hypnotized people in a Hollywood movie, like admiring a flag and all this kind of things and all these rituals. And yeah, and what do you often see in these cult-like situations? You see a lot of abuse, you see a lot of violence, sexual abuse, and we see the same thing happening in Israel. It's one of the most powerful global cults, you could say, that there is right now, and it's deeply intertwined with imperialism, with U.S. EU Israeli imperialism, and capitalism, of course. All these corporations, these billionaires. It's fascinating how that interacts with our human psychology. There are so many structural reasons why Zionism is the way it is and why it's still there. It's so deeply intertwined with the structures of the system that we are in, that it's just almost not only impossible to get rid of, but also that's why it's so important for that way of thinking, that ideology, to reproduce itself among people, because the system, the structure needs it to survive. You understand what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me ask you an ethical question, Karim. Do you believe that, and I'm going to ask you about two groups. First let's talk about Jewish citizens of Israel. Okay, so people who are actually citizens of Israel, and then Jews living in the diaspora who are not citizens of Israel. So my question to you for each of these groups is, do you believe as an ethical matter that one or both of these groups has a greater obligation than you and me, neither of whom is a member of the Jewish community, to defend Palestinian human rights? And if so, why?
Yes, I think so. Why do I say that? I always say, if you benefit in one way, shape, or form from the social inequality built on what is happening to another group, you have the responsibility to do something about it. That's why I always say white people have more obligation to do something about racism than the victims themselves. Why do we have to do it? I mean, you often hear, why do we have to do it? That's in the past. Slavery is in the past. Genocide of the Holocaust was in the past. This and that and that. I am not responsibility for what my ancestors did. In a one way, shape, or form, that's true. But I always say, if today you're still benefiting from that inequality, and you're not trying to do anything to minimize or eradicate that benefit, then in my opinion, you're responsible, or at least partly, because you are benefiting and you are taking it without doing anything about it. But that inequality that you're talking about is built on the genocide and unfairness towards other people. So when it comes to Israeli Jews or Western Jews who are in very privileged positions, often, and even the ones that are maybe in a poor neighborhood or whatever, they're still benefiting from their white Jewishness most of the time. We're most of the time talking about Ashkenazi Jews.
Mm-hmm.
They're still benefiting from an unfair, unequal system, and in particular compared to the Palestinians. And until that is not resolved, but you still call yourself a Jew and you identify with Israel, then you have a responsibility, in my opinion, more so than us who do not benefit from that system by oppressing another people.
Yeah, I agree, brother. I absolutely agree. In fact, I apply that principle to myself because I devote quite a bit of my time to critiquing the Canadian government, disrupting events at which Canadian politicians are speaking, organizing protests, and also the governments of Greece. And the amount of time I spend critiquing these governments and on their, appalling moral bankruptcy, domestically and particularly internationally, is disproportionate to the level of power they have in the world. Like at the end of the day, the Greek government has very, very little power. And the Canadian government doesn't have much more. It's at best a middle power, and it's certainly not a kingmaker. So why do I spend all of this time critiquing them, given the limits of their power? It's because I'm a Canadian citizen and I'm a Greek ethnically and a Greek citizen. And both of these governments purport to speak in my name. Both of them are funded with my tax dollars, in part by my tax dollars. And so I just feel I have an obligation to devote, generous amounts of my time to exposing their moral bankruptcy and their crimes. And I would do that even if I wasn't a journalist and a lawyer. Just as a citizen, I would do that. So I agree with you, brother.
Yeah, and that's also the reason why I often talk about the Netherlands. It may seem like a very small country, but it was the first major global colonial superpower before the Brits. People can look it up. Capitalism was born in the Netherlands. The first stock market was in Amsterdam. And today, the leader of NATO is our former prime minister. The Dutch are deeply, deeply intertwined in U.S. imperialism, but they just get away with it because they act like they're small. And everybody thinks, it's that egalitarian society where everything's hallelujah and prostitution and gay marriage. Oh, and of course, smoking weed. But if you look at the background, I mean, Dutch soldiers are found in Lebanon. They're caught by the Lebanese authorities. What are they doing there? Dutch were in Afghanistan, in Iraq, etc., just getting away with it all the time. And that's the kind of thing that I'm also shining a light on. It's a very important NATO power. Why are we not focusing on that? And that's a responsibility indeed of somebody who comes from the Netherlands, and I totally agree with you there.
That was always an enlightened discussion, brother. Thank you very much for coming back onto our program. And the next time we speak, just so all of our audience knows, we're planning to get deeper into our personal backgrounds and how that has influenced our activities and worldview today. If you found this to be informative, please like and share this video. And if you're not already a subscriber to Reason to Resist or BettBeat Media, we encourage you warmly to become one. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.